Now that the positioning of the camera, the holder, and the softbox are optimized, I open up the holder, insert the film, then slide it back and forth until it is properly centered. I also tape it down so it doesn't fall out while I'm closing the holder. To prevent the front of the holder popping open, I wrap tape around its handle to lock it shut. Critical focusing is next. I really need to be bang on here since even with the camera set to f11, there will be little depth of field. When you move in close on a subject, their image on the imaging sensor is bigger. In this case, at 74 centimeters, my image of the film will only be reduced to 1/4 of its actual size. The closer you get to magnification, the less depth of field you have. The last thing I do before taking the image is dust removal. A few good puffs from my dust blower does the job. By the way, my first image is just a test image. This image was originally shot to test the film manufacturer's ISO rating and film color balance, which in digital we call white balance. The ISO and color balance were always listed on the film box, and they were just a suggestion. It wasn't necessarily going to be the best for you. With this test, I could figure out my effective ISO so as to optimize my light meter's ISO setting when shooting that type of film. This test was captured in the mid-1990s on Kodak Ektachrome 100+, and as you can see, is positive rather than negative film. This film's sensitivity to light was rated at 100 ISO by Kodak, but through tests like this, I found 80 ISO yielded better exposures with my meter and cameras. I also use this test to judge color. If I felt that the color was off, I would correct it by placing the appropriate Kodak Ratten color correction filter or filters over my camera lens before shooting. Unlike digital raw image files where you can set color after the exposure in raw processing software, film has to capture good color at the time of the exposure if the image on your film is to be even close to color correct. Obviously, if you digitize your film as I'm doing here, you can do some correction in post. But overall quality is better if you have good color in the film images to begin with. As you can see, my test image is made up of lots of neutral tones. I will use one of these light gray tones from this test image to white balance my raw image captures during processing in raw processing software. Click once with the white balance tool on that tone, then batch apply its white balance to all subsequent images. Obviously, most photographers won't have a test image like this, but you can still do something similar. Just use a neutral tone from one of your images and then apply these settings to all other film images that are shot on the same film type and setup. If you change your setup, like using a different light or changing its power, you'll need to reshoot your test image, then create a new white balance from it. When you photograph your films, you're really photographing the bright white glowing surface of the light source through a colored filter, that filter being the film image. If you don't have a softbox or octabox, you can project light through a suspended white fabric like a scrim or even a bed sheet. Or you could create a light source by pointing a light directly onto a light tone neutral wall behind the film setup. Whichever light source you decide to go with, keep in mind that you're shooting directly into the light source. So check for a lens flare and, if necessary, block areas of that source appearing around your film holder with flags or dark fabric. With everything pretty much in place, it's time to set the power of the monoblock strobe so I can get a good exposure of its light streaming through my film. To set the perfect brightness for my softbox, I need to make this backlight into a glowing white source, but not too crazy bright. To this end, a reflective meter reading, not an instant meter reading, is taken off the white front fabric of the softbox. Knowing that I have my camera set to f11 at 100 ISO, I compare my reflective meter reading to this f11 reading. My meter reads f45, which tells me that the light source is too bright. f45 is 4 stops brighter than f11. To correct this, I turn the strobe power down until the meter reads f32, which is just 3 stops brighter than f11. I find that making the backlighting 3 stops brighter than the camera setting is the perfect brightness for backlighting my color transparency images. You're now ready to shoot. With my test film capture open in raw processing software, I find a neutral 3/4 tone, in other words, light gray, then white balance off it. Using this white balance, I batch apply it to all subsequent image files that I just shot on this set and that are from the same film stock. You may have noticed that my film copy stand arrangement is a little different from most film copying setups. The most common setup places the film on a light box table and requires the camera to be positioned parallel to the table, making shooting down on it necessary. For me, I prefer this setup, which places the film subject and camera perpendicular to the floor. Also, I set the height of the camera and the film and the light source so that no bending or standing on tippy toes is necessary to see and work. A little easier on the back. This perpendicular to floor setup has the added benefit of less surfaces to collect dust since the film has no scanner glass bed or light table plexiglass near or against it. Also, this perpendicular orientation makes it harder for dust to collect on the film surface since the gravity drags these pesky particles down onto the floor. And finally, what about quality? Which is better, the camera or the scanner? I scanned the same 4x5 transparency film for a comparison. Check this out, as is unmanipulated comparison of the scanned image and the photograph version. In the end, I had trouble picking out the best. They were both quite good, but different. On photographing and scanning subsequent images, I found that I preferred photographing for some and scanning for others. It is very subjective. Reproducing an image creates a generation loss, which is mainly a buildup of total contrast. The Epson scanner produces a little less buildup, whereas the camera has a little more. The contrast of the camera captured images were easily tweaked in post with no noticeable degradation. My camera, like most late model professional digital cameras, is especially good in this regard. Its dynamic range is quite vast, allowing significant adjustments without breaking apart tonal gradations. My final choice would be the camera since its speed cuts the process to a mere fraction of the time. But if there were only a few images to digitize, I would opt for the scanner since it's ready to go. There's no setup of camera and lighting. By the way, the distance you are from the light source while metering with a reflective meter doesn't really matter, providing that the whole surface of the light source is more or less evenly lit. If you're using long duration lighting like LED or tungsten, then dial the shutter speed on your meter until the aperture setting reads the same as the camera aperture setting you'll be using for the shoot. Next, set your camera shutter speed to 3 stops longer than the shutter speed displayed on your meter. You're now ready to shoot. By the way, if you don't own a handheld meter, you could use your in-camera meter, but not if you're using strobe or flash, since these built-in meters can't read bursts of light. Well, that's it. Now you can eat up hours and hours of downtime and then use all those newly digitized legacy images to bore your family and friends to death.